Ilyra Ashbourne crushed her fingers into the beggar's sleeve as the claiming bell tolled. The entire moonlit hall seemed to stop breathing, but she dragged him one step closer to the altar anyway. Dozens of nobles turned, silks whispering, jewels flashing, as the lowest-born woman in the room pulled a hooded stranger out of the shadows. Across the dais, Lord Varos's smile froze. The brand of her would be owner stark against the torchlight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. The beggar stumbled, bare toes scraping the polished stone. Yet his balance recovered faster than it should have for a man in threadbare linen and dirt-streaked skin. Ilyra felt the faint flecks of muscle beneath his sleeve, a warning that he was not nearly as helpless as he looked. Good, she thought fiercely, even as her heart thrashed against her ribs. Let them see that I won't go quietly. The high priestess's staff slammed down once. The sound cracked through the chamber like lightning. Who calls a bond out of turn? Her voice rang, sharp as a blade. The silver threads in her braids caught the glow of the ceremonial braziers. The pairings have been decreed. No rogue claims will be honored tonight. Ilyra's knees wanted to buckle, but she refused to let them. She stepped forward until she stood on the first step of the dais, the beggar a solid presence at her side. I do, she said, and hated the tremor she heard in her own voice. Ilyra Ashbourne of the lower quarter. I invoke the ancient right of self-claim. A murmur surged through the hall, scandal thick as smoke. Self-claim was an old law, relic of before the monarchy tightened its grip, before noble houses learned to trade wolves like coin. Across the dais, Lord Varos's eyes narrowed to slits. His wolf, a pale thing beneath his skin, pressed forward, scenting challenge. High priestess, he drawled, every syllable dripping contempt. This girl is pledged to my house. Papers were filed, coin exchanged. Girl, not woman. Not Wolf. Not anything that implied choice. Ilyra's jaw ached from the force of her teeth pressed together. She folded her fingers tighter into the beggar's sleeve to stop them from shaking. Your papers were signed without my consent, she said. Her gaze did not leave the high priestess's. The law says no wolf can be bound without voicing their own assent at the ceremony. I withhold mine. I claim another. The high priestess's stare shifted, finally, to the man at Ilyra's side. He had kept his head bowed, hood shadowing most of his face, posture loose in a way that screamed deference, submission, invisibility. But when the priestess's attention brushed him, he went very still. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of a predator being measured. Ilyra felt it in the way his arm turned to stone beneath her hand. Her wolf, curled miserably deep in her chest dulled for years by rejection and suppression, lifted her head for the first time in weeks. What are you doing, little one? The ghost of that inner voice whispered. Saving us. Ilyra whispered back, though her tongue did not move. Remove your hood, the high priestess commanded. The beggar's head angled just slightly, as if weighing options. Then gloved fingers, she realized with a flicker of confusion that his hands were not bare. Though she had seen his feet were, rose to the edge of the hood. The cloth fell back. He was not handsome in the polished, cultivated way of the nobles lining the hall. There were no gemstones at his throat, no precious metal in his hair. Yet his features were carved with an arresting precision. High cheekbones dusted with road grime, a strong nose, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled and never begged. A faint scar bisected his left eyebrow, drawing attention to eyes the color of storm-lit amber. His gaze flicked over Ilyra in a swift, assessing sweep, then lifted to the dais. For an instant, something sharp and unguarded burned their authority. Fury, something that stirred a memory she could not place. Then his expression smoothed into the careful blankness of a man used to surviving by going unnoticed. "Name," the high priestess demanded. Ilyra's fingers dug in warning. "Don't," she pleaded silently. If he said the wrong thing, if he refused, Varos would drag her from the hall in chains. Ilyra's fingers dug in warning. "Don't," she pleaded silently. If he said the wrong thing, if he refused, Varos would drag her from the hall in chains. "Kier," the beggar said after a heartbeat. His voice was low and rough, the syllable rasping over her skin like smoke. "Of nowhere that matters." A few nobles tittered. Lower-born wolves along the back walls stared with wide, hungry eyes. In the upper gallery, advisors shifted, their whispers a storm Ilyra refused to hear. "Kier of nowhere," Lord Varos sneered. "You expect us to believe this gutter rat has a legitimate bond with the girl? That the moon chose him over a seated lord?" There it was, the heart of it, the part that made her blood go cold. The lie had to become truth. Not by magic, her Wolf was too scarred for that. But by performance, by conviction, by every shred of stubborn dignity she had left. Ilyra lifted her chin. "He is my chosen," she said clearly. The words cut the air between them, a blade laid on an altar. "Our bond formed outside these walls, long before your papers were forged, my lord. The moon witnessed it. You cannot unmake what she has already seen." Gasps. A hiss of outrage from the Varos box. The high priestess's fingers tightened on her staff. Kier's head turned slowly toward her. Other men would have looked at her with disbelief, or contempt, or reluctant pity at being dragged into noble politics. His gaze held none of that. It was curious, watching her as if she were a puzzle he'd never expected to see assembled. And now that she'd taken shape, he couldn't quite look away. "Is that so?" he murmured, just for her, the words vibrating against the frantic pulse in her wrist. "Little Wolf, you and I have never spoken before tonight." Panic jolted through her. If he refused here, if he told the truth. She tightened her grip, nails biting the rough cloth of his sleeve. "You owe them nothing," she whispered through her teeth, lips barely moving. "I know how they treat beggars outside these walls. I know what they'd do if they saw you near their gates on any other night. Help me, and I swear I'll find a way to repay." "Enough," the high priestess cut in. Her gaze pinned Kier. "Do you deny the bond this woman claims? Answer carefully." "The moon hears our oaths." Silence yawned open. Kier's eyes flicked back to the dais, to Lord Varos, whose jaw was clamped so tight a vein pulsed in his temple, to the ring of guards who would drag Ilyra away the instant he said no. When his attention returned to her, something had changed in it. "I do not deny it," he said, the words soft but steady. "If the lady claims me, I stand." The hall exploded. Wolves spoke over one another, outrage and fascination crashing like waves. Someone shouted that this was a farce, that the lower quarter knew nothing of sacred rites. Others muttered about omens, about the moon's will revealed in unlikely places. Ilyra's legs went weak with relief, but there was no time to sag. The high priestess's staff slammed down again, silencing the room with visible effort. "Then the claim will be tested," she said. "According to rite." Ilyra swallowed. Of course. It would not be as simple as words. The testing chalice was brought forth. A shallow bowl of moon, silver etched with runes so old even the scholars only guessed their meaning. A novice poured in water drawn from the sacred spring beneath the palace. Another added a few drops of the blood-red claiming wine. "Hands," the high priestess instructed, "over the chalice. If there is even a thread of bond between you, the water will show it. And if there isn't," Ilyra thought, "Varos will have me flayed for daring to defy him." Her palms felt suddenly slick. Kier extended his hand first. Not the grimy, broken things she expected of a street beggar. His fingers were calloused, yes, but the calluses were precise, as if formed by blade and reins, not by scrabbling in dirt. The leather glove creaked as he peeled it back, revealing skin marked by faint old scars across the knuckles. He held his hand over the bowl, waiting for her. Ilyra forced herself to move. She removed her own glove with less grace, nearly dropping it. Her hand hovered above his for a heartbeat, every instinct in her screaming that this was wrong, that bonds couldn't be forged from lies. But no one ever asked what she wanted when they signed the contracts. No one ever listened when she said no. Tonight, the only sin she could not live with was surrender. She placed her hand over his. Warmth seared through her skin, startlingly strong. Her Volf, a shadow in the back of her mind, flinched as if from sudden light. Kier inhaled sharply. The sound barely broke the air between them, but she felt it a subtle shift in the tension of his fingers, the way his shoulders drew tight. His gaze snapped to her face. What was that? Hunger flickered, then vanished. The high priestess began to chant. The old words wound around them like smoke. By blood and bone, by moon and mind, she intoned, let the truth of this bond be known. If they are bound, let light show. If they lie, let darkness fall. A single drop of wine was released into the water. It hit the surface in utter silence, then erupted into color. Light flared up from the chalice silver and deep, molten gold, threading like veins through the water. The glow speared up into their joined hands, racing across skin in intricate lines that burned without pain. The hall went dead quiet. Ilyra's breath locked in her chest. She stared as luminous patterns, vines, stars, the faint outline of a crescent rose and sank into their skin, leaving behind only a faint shimmering trace. This wasn't possible. Her Volf, who had retreated from every touch since the day her first would-be mate recoiled from her, threw her head back and howled. Kier's fingers clamped around hers, hard enough to hurt. His eyes met hers, wide not with Beggar's awe, but with a horror that said he understood exactly what the magic meant. The chalice dimmed. Bond confirmed. The high priestess whispered, sounding almost shaken. By moon and magic, these two stand as mates. No one moved. Then, all at once, the room erupted again, this time with a different flavor. Not outrage. Fear. Ilyra staggered back a step, her hand slipping from Kier's. Her skin still felt too tight, as if the light were trapped beneath it. She pressed her palm to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. This isn't real. It can't be real. She had faked the claim. She had lied. But the moon, it seemed, had not. Lord Varos surged to his feet, fury twisting his noble features into something vicious. Trickery, he spat. Some gutter sorcery. I demand an investigation. You demand nothing, the high priestess said, voice suddenly steel. She turned to Ilyra and Kier. By right, you are bound. The king will wish to see you before the moon sets. Until then, you will be housed within the inner rooms. Guard, she added, flicking her gaze to the nearest soldier. Escort them. The guard stepped forward, silver-edged armor catching the light. He bowed stiffly. My lady, sir. The title sat oddly on Kier's ragged shoulders. He did not argue, did not protest that he had no business in the inner rooms. He simply inclined his head, sending his hood slipping further back, and gestured for Ilyra to move first, as if he were the one honoring her. Her legs carried her because they had to. As they passed Lord Varos's box, she felt his gaze spear into her like knives. This is not finished, he hissed, too low for most to hear. Ilyra kept her eyes on the door. No, she murmured, just loud enough that Kier might catch it. It never is. The corridor outside the ceremony hall was colder, quieter, the marble floor worn by centuries of wolves pacing these same paths. Torches guttered along the walls, their flames leaping shadows over tapestries depicting past Alpha Kings in all their battle glory. Kier's footfalls were too soft for a man his size. Ilyra heard the guard's armor more than she heard the beggar behind her. Beggar, she reminded herself, clinging to the word like a rope. No matter what the chalice had shown, no matter how her skin still hummed where his had touched it, he was a stranger she'd dragged into her disaster. This way, the guard said, turning down a narrower passage. They're actually giving us rooms. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Lower wolves like her did not get rooms in the inner palace. They slept where they were told, when they were told, if they were allowed inside the walls at all. Bonded pairs awaiting the king's audience are afforded certain courtesies, the guard replied, tone flat. For tonight, at least. For tonight. Tomorrow everything could be different. Annulled. Punished. Or worse, permanent. Her Wolf stirred uneasily. The guard stopped before a carved wooden door banded with iron. He unlocked it with a key from his belt and pushed it open to reveal a modest chamber by noble standards. Anyway, a bed big enough for two dominated one side. A small table and chairs occupied the center. A narrow hearth crackled to life with a gesture from the guard. Ilyra froze on the threshold. One bed. Heat flared in her face so quickly she almost swayed. The tension in her shoulders ratcheted so tight it hurt. You'll remain here until summoned, the guard said. His gaze skimmed over her and Kier with the detached irritation of a man who thought he had more important things to do. Do not attempt to leave. The inner ring is heavily warded and patrolled. We have no intention of wandering, Ilyra said stiffly. Something in new bond excuses poor judgment. His mouth twitched. Food will be sent shortly. He left, the lock clicking into place behind him. Silence rushed in. Ilyra stood in the doorway, fingers clenched around the strap of her modest cloak, heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted out. Behind her, Kier exhaled slowly. You should sit, he said quietly. Before you fall. She spun to face him. Up close, without the chaos of the hall between them, he seemed larger. The grime on his skin could not fully obscure the strength in the lines of his body, the way he held himself like a man accustomed to command, even when he wore rags. I'm not going to fall, she said, though the room did tilt just a fraction. And you don't give orders here. This is my mess. Our mess, he corrected. You dragged me into it. Her throat tightened. If you regret helping, the door is locked from the outside, not the in. No one will stop you from shouting the truth down the corridor until the guards come running. His brows lifted, the faintest hint of amusement breaking through whatever storm brewed behind his eyes. You think I helped you? She blinked. You didn't? I said I did not deny your claim. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, as if approaching a frightened animal. That is not the same as helping. Anger flared, hot and brittle over the roar, shaking softness inside her. Then why? Because, he said, and something in his voice made her go still. When you put your hand on my arm in that hall, every wolf in that room watched to see if I would pull away. So I did not. She stared up at him. You cared what they thought, she managed. I cared, he said, eyes briefly drifting toward the bed, then back to her face. What it would do to you if I made you a liar to your own people. Her laugh came out hollow. They are not my people. I'm the girl whose family sold her contract for a handful of coins and a promise Lord Varos never intended to keep. No one in that hall would blink if I disappeared tomorrow. They blinked tonight, Kier said softly. Quite a lot. He was too close. Not in distance. There were still 2 full steps between them, but his attention felt like touch, like fingers tracing over places no one else noticed. It made the carefully constructed wall inside her years of grit and numbness and quiet endurance shudder. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" His voice dropped, rougher now. "Don't look at me like I matter to you," she said. "We both know this bond should not exist. The magic was wrong." "The chalice," she broke off, pressing her nails into her palm. "There was a mistake. Magic doesn't make mistakes." The floor seemed to tilt again. "You can't know that. You're a beggar, not a priest." A shadow crossed his face. "Is that what you see when you look at me?" "What else would I see?" She shot back, more sharply than she intended. "You were in the shadows. No house crest, no mark, no escort. You smell like roads and smoke. And underneath, something else." She hadn't let herself focus on scent in the chaos of the hall. Her Vulfa's senses had been muted for so long she'd almost forgotten how to use them. Now, in the small chamber with the door locked and the fire burning low, she made the mistake of inhaling. Not fully, just a cautious breath. Warmth slid into her lungs, cedar and winter air, steel, and something wild she had no word for. It wrapped around her, subtle and relentless, brushing along the edges of wounds she'd trained herself not to feel. Her Vulf pressed closer to it, desperate and wary all at once. Kier watched her, eyes narrowing. "What do you smell, Ilyra Ashbourne?" Her cheeks flamed. "Nothing." "Liar," he said, but there was no real bite to it. Only something darker, like he didn't know whether to be satisfied or alarmed. She stepped away, putting the small table between them. Her fingers busied themselves with the frayed edge of the tablecloth. "Any bond can be annulled," she said, clinging to the practical like a shield. "Kings do it. Counselors. Varos himself bought and sold mates like livestock. There has to be a way. Annulment requires proof of harm or deceit from one party to the other," Kier said. He moved to the side, not closing the distance but angling it, so that if she turned toward the fire, he'd still be within her peripheral vision. "Convince them I forced you, or that you tricked me. You did neither. Then we are back where we started." Her hands went still. "Back where we started." Except they weren't. Before the ceremony, she had been on the brink of being handed to Varos, of her life becoming a long corridor of locked doors and quiet screams. She had walked into the hall resigned to a fate she'd never chosen. Now there was this man, this impossible, unwanted, searing bond. "Why were you there?" she asked suddenly. "In the shadows of the ceremony hall. Beggars aren't allowed inside the inner ward." His expression did not change, but she felt rather than saw the way his attention sharpened. "Maybe I took a wrong turn," he said lightly. "Through 3 guarded gates and wards that taste every Vulf who passes." She arched a brow. "You don't stumble into the king's mating ceremony by accident." "You did," he said. "I was summoned," she snapped. "My name was on a list, like a lamb being called to slaughter." Kier's gaze softened, but he didn't push. "You don't answer the question," she pressed. "Who are you really, Kier of nowhere?" For a heartbeat, she thought he might tell her. Something in his posture shifted, as if words gathered behind his teeth, heavy and dangerous. The fire painted his face in amber, catching on the scar in his brow. Then he leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "A man in need of a bath and a meal," he said. "And, apparently, a wife." The word snagged in her chest. Wife. She had imagined what being claimed would look like, once. Before rejection hollowed her out. Before her first almost mate looked at her, like she was a broken thing and turned his back. She had imagined gentleness, shared laughter, perhaps children, if the moon was kind. Not this. Not a bond forged in desperation with a man whose secrets crackled around him like storm air. A knock at the door made her jump. Food, a muffled voice called. A hatch near the bottom of the door slid open, and a tray was shoved through. The scents of roast meat, fresh bread, and spiced tea flooded the room. Her stomach growled, treacherous. Kier's lips twitched. "Eat," he said. "If we're to face the king before dawn, you'll need your strength." "You say that as if you've done it before," she muttered. But she moved to the tray anyway. The hunger was bone deep, the kind that came from years of never quite having enough. She tore a piece of bread and offered it to him without looking up. He did not take it. "You first," he said. She frowned. "I'm not poisoning you." "Habit," he replied. "Where I come from. A man who eats before the lady loses his hand." "Savage place," she said dryly. "Very," he agreed, and there was the ghost of a smile now, real and fleeting. She took a bite, the bread warm and soft against her tongue. Her eyes closed involuntarily on a sigh. When she opened them, Kier was watching her again, that same too careful intensity in his gaze. "What now?" she asked after a moment, setting the bread down. "We wait until they call us to be paraded before the king like curiosities." "More or less," he said, "unless you'd rather try to claw through the stone and run for the river." "I've considered worse plans," she admitted. He huffed a quiet sound that might have been laughter. "Rest, little Wolf," he said. "I'll take the floor." Her head snapped up. "Absolutely not." He blinked. "You'd rather share the bed with a stranger?" Her pulse stuttered. "I'd rather you not freeze on the stone," she said. "There are blankets." "We can," she swallowed, heat creeping up her neck. "We'll make a wall of pillows." His brows rose. "A wall?" "Yes. In case the magic accidentally makes us act married in our sleep." "In case," she retorted. "You forget yourself." The silence that followed went thick. Kier's gaze dropped, just for a fraction of a second, to her mouth. Her chest tightened, breath catching on nothing. "I don't forget," he said finally, his voice a low scrape. "Not things like this." She didn't know what to do with that. So she did the only thing she could. She moved. She dragged the blankets off the bed, hands fumbling, arranging them into a barrier down the middle. Her fingers shook only a little. Kier watched, saying nothing, until she was done. "Satisfied?" he asked. "No," she said honestly. "But it will do." They lay down on their respective sides, backs to each other, the wall of blankets between them too flimsy to stop scent or sound, or the awareness of another heartbeat in the same space. Ilyra stared at the far wall, where the firelight flickered over the carved crest of the royal house, a howling wolf encircled by a ring of stars. Somewhere beyond that stone, the king waited. What will he be like? Her wolf whispered. "Distant," she answered. "Untouchable. A man who signs papers that let lords like Varos buy women like me." The thought burned, a dull, familiar ache. Slowly, despite the riot in her mind, exhaustion dragged at her. Her eyelids grew heavy. The day's terror and adrenaline crashed into a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the ceremony, and everything to do with years of fighting just to breathe. She drifted. And somewhere in the in-between, as consciousness frayed, she felt it a brush of warmth against the back of her hand where it lay near the pillow wall. Not quite a touch. A hover, like someone reaching in the dark and stopping just short. Her wolf leaned into it anyway. Sleep took her. She woke to the sound of the lock turning. Ilyra bolted upright, heart slamming into her throat. The fire had burned low. Pale pre-dawn light bled around the edges of the shutters. Kier was already on his feet. He stood between the bed and the door, shoulders squared, every line of his body coiled as the guard stepped in. The easy, shifting looseness of the beggar was gone. In its place was a stillness that made the small room feel suddenly much too small. "The king will see you now," the guard announced. Ilyra's mouth went dry. This is it. There would be no turning back after this. No quiet annulment. No slipping back into anonymity. Whatever the king decided would fix the course of her life. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, feet finding the cold floor. Her dress from the ceremony hung on a peg. She pulled it on with fumbling fingers, smoothing the wrinkles, wishing for a comb and a scrap of dignity. Kier watched her for a moment, then reached into the shadows near the hearth. He drew out a garment she hadn't seen before, a dark, plain coat, well made, despite its lack of adornment. It did not look like something belonging to a beggar. He shrugged it on, the movement strangely graceful. The coat fell just right over his shoulders, as if tailored to them. Ilyra filed the detail away, nerves too frayed to examine it. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "No," she said. "But I'll walk anyway." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. They followed the guard through a warren of corridors that grew grander with each turn. The air thickened with incense and the faint, electric tang of old magic. Guards stood at attention every few yards, armor gleaming, eyes tracking their passage. Wolves moved out of their path, not with disdain, but with a wary curiosity that prickled the hairs on the back of Ilyra's neck. "News travels fast," she murmured. "Magic flares in the heart of the palace," Kier said under his breath. "Everyone feels it." She shot him a look. "You speak as if you know from experience." He didn't answer. At last, they reached the set of towering double doors, carved with the crest of the royal house. 2 elite guards flanked the entrance, their armor chased with gold, spears gleaming. "The newly bonded pair," their escort announced. "By order of the high priestess." One of the elites rapped on the door with the butt of his spear. From within, a voice called, "Enter." The doors swung inward. The throne room of the Alpha King was nothing like the ceremony hall. Where the hall had been all polished stone and glittering finery, this space felt older, wilder. Thick stone pillars rose like tree trunks to a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations. Furs lined the dais. The scent of pine and cold iron threaded through the air. And at the far end, on a throne carved from a single massive block of dark wood, sat the king. Ilyra's steps faltered. She had never been this close to him. Lower wolves saw their monarch only from a distance, small figures on high balconies or in parade processions. Rumors painted him a dozen ways: cruel, distant, fair, ruthless. A man who had inherited a fractured kingdom and stitched it together with blood and iron. He looked younger than she'd expected, not in years, but in the way he held himself, as if every muscle was coiled for movement even at rest. Dark hair fell in careless waves around a face made for war councils and whispered oaths. His eyes, from this distance, were unreadable. They walked until they stood at the foot of the dais. "Kneel," the guard murmured. Ilyra dropped to one knee, bowing her head. Beside her, she sensed Kier doing the same. The room was full advisors, nobles, the high priestess, guards, but the weight of the king's gaze made it feel like there were only 3 of them. "Rise," he said after a moment. They did. "I am told," the king said, voice steady, "that a bond was declared and confirmed last night that contradicts contracts already signed." His gaze settled on Ilyra. Heat crawled up her neck. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said, forcing her voice not to shake. "I invoked self-claim. You defied a seated lord." There was no censure in his tone, only an observation. "Why?" "Because I am tired of being bought and sold," she thought. because I would rather throw myself at the feet of a stranger than live one more day as a thing. Because he is not my mate, she said aloud, and I will not spend my life chained to a man the moon did not choose for me. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. The king regarded her for a long beat. Then his gaze shifted to Kier. And you, he said, Kier of nowhere, do you understand what you agreed to when you did not deny her claim? Kier's jaw worked once. I understand that to call a woman a liar in front of her entire pack is a cruelty I will not commit, he replied. Whatever punishment you decide for me, I accepted the bond. I stand by it. Something dangerous flickered in the king's eyes. Punishment, he repeated softly. You think that is why you are here? Kier said nothing. The king leaned back in his throne, fingers tapping once against the carved armrest. The high priestess shifted, but did not speak. The chalice flared brighter than it has in years, the king said at last. Half the palace felt it. Bonds like that do not form by accident. Ilyra's skin prickled. Your Majesty, she began. With respect, the bond was not expected. I only meant to save yourself, he finished. From Varos, her mouth closed. Yes, you risked being declared oathbreaker, he said. Risked exile, death even, for freedom. For truth, she whispered. Even if I had to lie to reach it. For a heartbeat silence. Then, to her shock, the king huffed a quiet sound that might, in another man, have been called a laugh. Stand closer, he said suddenly. She stiffened. Your Majesty? You and your mate. His gaze sharpened. Come closer to the dais. Her heart kicked. She glanced at Kier, who gave the slightest of nods. They stepped forward together. The king rose. Up close, he was taller than she'd realized. The authority he carried, not something he wore like a cloak, but something that lived in his bones. His scent hit her a moment later, cedar, winter air, steel and wild, threaded with a pulse of power that made her Volf flatten her ears and bare her throat in instinctive submission. Her knees wanted to buckle, because it was the same scent that had wrapped around her in the small chamber, the same warmth that had seeped into her skin when Kier's hand touched hers. No, she thought wildly. It couldn't be. The king stepped down from the dais. The room seemed to hold its breath. Look at me, he said quietly. Ilyra obeyed. Amber eyes met hers. Eyes she had seen last night, framed by dirt and a ragged hood. Eyes that had watched her with that same too careful intensity as she lied to an entire hall. Her breath caught. The world narrowed to a single point, those eyes. That scent. The impossible echo in her bones. The king lifted a hand. With a motion too lazy to be called a gesture, and too precise to be anything else, he wiped 2 fingers across his jaw. The faint smear of dirt there vanished as if it had never been. The scar in his brow, half hidden last night by shadow, caught the light. No, she whispered. He had been sitting on the throne when they entered. He had not moved. He could not have, except he had. Except magic, she realized with a lurch, was more than chalices and old words. Illusion, shifting, wolves wearing more than one face. The king's lips curved, not quite a smile. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. He stepped closer. Close enough that only she and the high priestess could hear the next words. You asked who I am, he murmured. Kier of Nowhere was one name. Corin Vales is another. The name crashed through her. Corin Vales, Alpha King of the United Packs, the man whose crest was carved above every court, whose sigil hung over the gates that only opened to wolves with the right blood. Her tongue felt numb. You, she croaked. You were in the shadows. You let me claim me? His eyes burned. You did more than that, little Wolf. You invoked an ancient right to bind yourself to a beggar. The moon saw fit to make it real. Her vision tunneled. She staggered back a step, heel catching on the edge of the dais. Kier, no. Corin caught her wrist before she could fall, fingers biting into her skin. Gasps rippled through the room as his hand closed around hers. Because the light flared again. Silver gold lines rushed up both their arms, brighter than before, searing through cloth as if it were nothing. Her Wolf howled, not in pain, but in a fierce, terrified joy that made her eyes sting. The king, someone choked. Mate. The high priestess breathed, awe and something like dread tangling in her tone. Not just magic. True and full. Lord Varos's voice rose in a strangled roar from somewhere in the crowd. This is impossible. She is no one. A contract girl. Corin's attention did not waver from Ilyra's face. You wanted freedom, he said softly, for her alone. Now you have it from Varos. But the cost. His fingers tightened. Do you understand the cost, Ilyra Ashbourne? Tears burned hot at the backs of her eyes. She jerked her wrist, but his grip was iron. Let me go, she whispered. I can't, he said, something raw cracking through his composure. Not without shredding both our wolves. Then unmake it, she said desperately. You're the king. You sign the papers. You break bonds as easily as you make laws. Not this, he said. Not us. The weight of every watching eye pressed in. Your Majesty, the High Priestess said, carefully neutral. What is your will? Corin, Kier King, and Beggar all at once looked away from Ilyra, just long enough to sweep the room with a gaze that could have frozen rivers. My will, he said slowly, is that no one speaks of contracts when the moon has spoken this loudly. Lord Varos's claim is void. Any who challenge it challenge me. A ripple of shock coursed through the room. He turned back to Ilyra. As for you, he murmured, voice dropping into something that made her heart pound for too many reasons. We have a great deal to discuss. My mate who thought she was binding herself to a nobody. The word mate slammed into her like a physical blow. Her knees buckled. Corin caught her, an arm around her waist, hauling her against him to keep her upright. The contact was too much. His scent crashed over her, unmasked now, threaded with the unmistakable, searing recognition of a true bond. Her Wolf arched into it, claws scraping at the inside of her skin, torn between fury and exultation. Ilyra's hands fisted in the front of his coat, not in affection, but in sheer wild panic. I didn't choose this, she rasped. His jaw tightened. Neither did I, but here we stand. I wanted a fake bond, she said. An escape. Not a crown. His eyes darkened. And I, he said, so low only she could hear, came to my own ceremony as a beggar, to see who among my people would defy a lord for the sake of their own soul. Her breath caught. You were testing us, she whispered. Testing them, he corrected. And you. The room felt like it was spinning. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.